Hello and welcome to Adapt with Danette FM. My name is Danette Fenton Menzies and we are currently recording season 2 of the Adapt podcast. In this season, we're talking about collaboration and problem solving, which are 2 chapters from my current book, The Adaptable Leader. Today, we're talking to Graham Winter and I'd like to welcome into the conversation my producer, Jez FM.
Thank you, Danette. Yeah, I'm very excited to be here. People will have noticed the FM similarity. Yes, I am your son, and I am also the podcast producer here. We are, of course, doing the Adaptable Leader companion podcast. So the Adaptable Leader, if you're looking at the video, is a book I am holding up right now that was written by Danette Fenton Menzies, aka Danette FM, who is hosting this podcast today. And it's really about breaking down how to be adaptable. The world is constantly changing. It's really important to stay adaptable. And if you want a simple model to do that, the accepts model in this is a great one. And again, when I said this, I was pointing to the book for the people that are just listening. And the important thing with that is that, you know, the Adaptable Leader, the accepts model, it's all really important stuff for us to know about. And this season we're actually breaking down just 2 of those letters, the P for problem solvings and the C for collaboration in the accepts model. And Graham Winter is the person that we're talking to today because he's talking about sort of adaptive solutions and adaptive problems, which is a very interesting topic. So Danette, did you want to tell us a bit about how you met Graham before we get into sort of any thoughts on the conversation?
So there's a lovely gentleman, Scott Ethorn, and Scott does a lot of publicity for people who are writing books, etc. And he shared one of the books that Graham is a co-author in called Toolkit for Turbulence. And what a fabulous book. And so I thought, definitely want to talk to Graham around collaboration and problem solving. So we had a fabulous conversation. A couple of things I'd love to share with the listeners. He shares an example of Kevin Sullivan, who is both a former Qantas and also US Navy pilot. And his story about a Qantas flight that he had where the plane kept dropping when it wasn't supposed to is just a really great example of how do you problem solve under pressure. I also loved the conversation where he talked about technical versus adaptive problems. And when something's technical, there's usually a right or wrong answer. When you've got an adaptive problem, it's much more difficult because there's no right or wrong solution. So when we go to collaborate, bringing in more people with divergent ideas, setting up what collaboration might look like for the group, what it doesn't look like for the group can be really helpful. And also the fact that when we're trying to problem solve, there is no right answer that is apparent. So it requires us to reiterate and reiterate as we problem solve to try and get closer to what may actually solve the problem. So I love that distinction between technical and adaptive situations and problems.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think, Danette, let's just jump into this conversation. He's got a very interesting background, which he highlights at the start, so people go check that out. And we'll see you on the other side of this conversation, everybody. So enjoy Danette's conversation with Graham Winter.
So, hello and welcome listeners and viewers for the Adapt with Danette FM podcast, season 2, where we're talking about both collaboration and or problem solving, depending on what the guest would love to talk about. And today I am very, very grateful because I have Graham Winter here to talk to us. He's got a new book and he's got also a book that has come out for the 3rd time. So he's going to share a little bit about them, plus talk about the questions we've got. So, Graham, I'm going to hand over to you and get you to introduce yourself if you wouldn't mind.
Thank you so much. Delightful to be chatting. We've had a great fun chat at the start as well, so hopefully that'll flow through. Look, my background, I often say I'm a performance psychologist. My career's had 2 sort of main themes running through it. I started in the corporate area, but early on I branched out into sports psychology. So I played first-class cricket early on and got an opportunity to work in the sports psychology area. So that culminated in being the Chief Psychologist for 3 Australian Olympic teams, including Sydney, which was fantastic. And then spent some time at PwC and their strategic change practice, and then ultimately created Think One Team, which started with a book, which was called Think One Team, which is the one that's just come out, the 3rd edition. And basically I've worked with mostly large, reasonably complex organisations Very consistent with what we're going to chat on today, helping them to try to adapt to a world that large organizations are not really set up to operate in. So that's what I enjoy doing, and I hope we have a good chat about collaboration and problem solving.
Love that introduction. And do you want to mention the name of the new book that's come out?
The new book is Toolkit for Turbulence, and it's co-authored with Martin Bean, Professor Martin Bean. So Martin was the Vice Chancellor at RMIT University for about 5 or 6 years, and prior to that, some interesting roles with the Open University in the UK, and also he was, I think, the global head of education products for Microsoft in the US. An amazing person, one of the best, probably 3 or 4 chief executives I've ever worked with. So we were keen to share some of the experiences we'd had working together with his leaders and with other leaders as well. And so we created Toolkit for Turbulence, and that's just come out in the last 4 or 5 months.
And it looks amazing. And we'll talk more about some of the resources from that a little bit later.
Thank you.
So let's start with the first question, which is, what have you seen or experienced that helps you with collaboration and or problem solving?
I've seen so much, I think, that fits into those two buckets. And I might just use a really simple story. From a group I'm working with at the moment, we had a workshop with their executive team earlier in the week. It was a half a day. It was on their role as executives, developing the capability of team-to-team collaboration. They're an NGO. They operate in two really I guess, different but connected areas. So one is around building housing, and the other one is around domestic violence and social support for families and communities and so on. So you've got this really interesting dynamic of, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this. You've got one group that's trying to deal almost with not just purely technical problems, but they're almost the engineering type problems. They require logic and a process. And then you've got this other area that's incredibly emotional. Yeah, where demand is always going to exceed any sort of supply that you can do as well. So what we were endeavoring to do was to really try and hone in on what do we actually mean by collaboration and partnering in this context? What is our role as leaders to create that environment for ourselves first and then for our people? Because we can't deal with any of our big challenges without being able to connect up. But when we connect up, we tend to only connect up when there's a problem. And then, of course, it's emotional. So I think I'm going to start, and we'll dive into the hows, but I think it's starting with understanding what we actually mean by collaboration, because it's such a widely used word. And I don't think people often have a sense of, well, what does it look like and what it doesn't look like? And how do we pragmatically and practically do that in this sort of environment?
Love that. And that actually sort of probably goes with the next question anyway, because that was around share an example of poor collaboration where I suspect it wasn't defined particularly well.
Oh, yeah.
And what were the impacts of not doing collaboration well? So I'd love to hear your definition, but also then an example of where it didn't work so well.
Oh, this one, I won't name the organisation. They're an international manufacturing organisation. They decided their product development and marketing people decided that alongside some of the R&D, that there was an opportunity in the market to produce this particular product. I need to be careful not naming the type of product, but they were international. They employed 10, 15,000 people around the world, and they had manufacturing plants in 5 or 6 different places. They built a manufacturing plant to specifically produce this product. They had every marketing, I guess, plan and tool and resource you could possibly imagine. The manufacturers built it, but they did it in a very siloed way because the way they were structured, their functions tended to be based by country. So it was pass the parcel. So anyway, to cut a long story short, they sold less than 1% of what their investment was. Their investment in the plant was in the hundreds of millions of dollars. They sold probably less product than you would have sold if you'd stuck it in a Bunnings and tried to sell it. So that to me was just, and ironically, we actually then were engaged by that organisation because they then had to do a rationalisation and a whole series of other things. And I'm actually going to use them as my best experience as well. But it was a beautiful example of nobody was back up defining what is the problem, what solution are we trying to exit to deal with, and then how do we design, develop, yeah, and then deliver that solution and learn as we go. It was a beautiful example of an old industrial model of, I think there's an idea, let's build the whole manufacturing plant, then we'll go out and sell it. Complete disaster, and probably that alongside one other decision ultimately ended up in that organization a few years later being folded into a much larger international. So it was just everything could go wrong. Maybe if I can just finish with saying, in the Think One Team book, we have 5 basic principles for teamwork across boundaries, and they're pretty simple. Share the big picture, share the reality, share the air, share the load, and share the wins and losses. This example was a perfect example of the opposite of that. Instead of sharing the big picture, they each pursued separate agendas. Instead of sharing the reality, they just avoided and denied the difficult conversations and passed them over the fence. In terms of sharing the air, there was no communication that was effective. It was stifled, blocked, or it just didn't happen. In terms of sharing the load, there was no sense of prioritization. It was just, this is your job, this is my job, pass the parcel over the wall. And then share the wins and losses. Well, people went for ground pretty quickly as soon as the numbers started to show up. So it was just a beautiful example. I should also point out those 5 rules are the rules of politics. So pursue your own agendas, avoid and deny, stifle communication, look after your own turf, and then play I win, you lose. They are actually the 5 of those. So there's a simple model for collaboration or not.
That's a good bad example.
It is
And I like that they
shocker.
used it then
Yeah.
to learn from it as well. So we'll talk about that a little
Yeah.
bit later on. So my next question is, based on your experience, what tips do you have for others? Now, this bit was added by Jez, who produces this, which is including young people who might be starting out around developing their problem solving, or it sounds like we're focusing on collaboration.
Yeah.
What are some things they can do to develop them?
Look, I think let's focus on both of them because I think, and the question I usually ask whenever I start with any sort of new client, and you will 100% appreciate this, Daniel. I mean, I'll just say, how many leadership models and frameworks do you think have been developed in the last 30 or 40 years? And people sort of, give me hundreds, thousands, millions, whatever. And I always say, I think there is one that is more important than any other, because if you use that, it enables you to then think about the challenge. And this is where I suppose I come to my performance psychology background, that, like, what are the challenges that we're trying to face here, and what is it we're trying to achieve? That's the model that Heifetz and his team developed back in the early 90s, which is the adaptive leadership model, and this distinction between a technical challenge and an adaptive challenge. And that to me is the whole starting point, because if you're dealing with a technical challenge, you're dealing with something that has got a right or wrong answer, that's got cause and effect, that you can plan your way logically through. So how you collaborate and how you problem solve can be planned in a very orderly, step-by-step sort of fashion. But on the other hand, if your challenges are adaptive, the solution, in fact, the problem's not even clear, let alone the solution. You're going to have to explore your way through it. You'll almost always, while they're called adaptive challenges, you'll have to shift assumptions and habits and beliefs. So as you lean more into those, emotions go up, uncertainty goes up, conflict goes up. So I think the critical thing I would say to a young person is, don't deal with your technical challenges in isolation, but you can. But you cannot deal with adaptive challenges in isolation. And the more adaptive the challenge, the more important the relationship becomes. And that to me is almost the foundation. That once you understand that, then you go, okay, so now I need to engage people. I need to get perspectives, get on the balcony, as Heifetz would have said. I need to bring in expertise. We're going to have to learn this together, and it's going to be cross-boundary. Okay, I'm going to have to bring in people to build trust. Our problem-solving method is going to have to be more iterative. We're going to loop and loop and loop rather than follow the manual. So I think that to me covers everything. If we don't appreciate the wickedness of the problem, as some people would say, then it doesn't matter how good your problem-solving tools are. Chances are you're putting a technical solution to an adaptive problem. And I'm paraphrasing Heifetz. I think that is the greatest gift that we've been given in leadership in the last 30 or 40 years, is that framework.
I love that framework. I did a program many years ago called Sydney Leadership, which was run by Benevolent Society, and they
Yeah,
had
yeah,
government, private sector, and not for profit. And they
yeah,
used his model from one of his students, and it changed my facilitation
yeah,
skill
yeah.
enormously. So, yeah, great. Love that answer.
It does, doesn't it? Because once you recognize that, what you start to realize is, and I did some work in the UK and the US at one stage and sort of came back. I remember sort of coming back. I'm like, we call Think One Team. We've written the book called Think One Team. And I come back to my team and go, I don't think we're in the team building business anymore. And they've gone, oh God, give him 2 weeks and he'll be over it. But what I said to them was, look, the thing that hit me more than anything else is we're actually trying to build a learning environment. That the critical capability isn't the teamwork. The critical capability is to build the environment in which you can learn, because you've just got to keep learning and testing and moving your way through that. And that's why psychological safety, accountability, and so on, all of those sort of elements start to become really important.
Love that. And I love, like, I'm a massive lifelong learner, so totally resonates as well. Yeah.
And it's that
So
openness, isn't it? Yeah,
it is.
you've got to
Yeah.
keep sort of tossing that stuff together. And that's what good leadership teams do. That's what good teams do. They can toss stuff around. I know we often call it, we tell clients, playing tennis. It's being able to bounce stuff backwards and forwards, but holding the tension. And I think, again, I suppose a lot of the teams I work with are executive teams, and they are large, and they're dealing with a lot of complexity, like running a university or running a defense area or whatever. But it's normal. It's helping them to recognize that it is normal in those situations when you're trying to deal with or trying to collaborate, that there will be conflict. That's natural. That problems will appear to be insoluble, because they are. There's no perfect right or wrong answer. Again, that's why you need trust, because you're going to have to be able to invest in some result, some sort of solution that won't be right. It won't be perfect. So it'll always be open to criticism. There'll always be trade-offs. So it's the art of building those sorts of things, I think, are really important. And it is art as much as it is science.
Totally agree. Oh, love this discussion. So let's go to our next one, which is, what's your favorite example of problem solving and collaboration, and why?
Well, I'm going to use actually, I'm going to use two. Can I use two? One of the introductory stories in the book Toolkit for Turbulence is with Kevin Sullivan. So Kevin was a former Qantas pilot, former US Navy pilot. He was the pilot, and it's very topical given the Singapore Airlines experience of recent times. Kevin was the pilot of QF-72. So if any of you listeners Google that, and probably many might be familiar with it. It's the most serious safety incident Qantas have ever had. The computers malfunctioned on a normal flight from Singapore to Perth. It did a nosedive twice. Kevin, as an ex-Navy pilot, managed to problem solve and to get control back of the plane. Then had to make the decision with his crew to find a place to land. They landed in a deserted, at that stage not being used Navy or Air Force airfield in the northwest of Australia, and then come out into the cabin with over 100 people injured with serious spinal injuries, and deal with the elements around that. And I think it is one of the most compelling stories. I'm just doing another article, Kevin, shortly, where we're just looking at his decision making and his leadership in that situation, and looking at it from the perspective of, on the one hand, you're dealing with this high stress, high pressure environment and problem solving in the moment, when everything is, as he said, my first thing is got to breathe. I've got to get some oxygen. I've got to be able to make clear decisions. I'm going to have to make quick choices. I've got to problem solve really quickly. So you've got that. Then you've got to make the or where do we land decision, which was, well, we should go on to Perth. Yeah, but it's already dived twice. How do I know it's not going to do it again? And then you've got the social leadership issue of, now I've got people who now want to know what happened. And I don't know what happened. I know that I've got you down onto the ground. So in his case, for the critical thing for him, and to me, the big learning is what pilots learn is this simple mental model: aviate, navigate, communicate. So aviate probably makes good sense. If you chat to a group and you go, you're in a plane, what do you reckon the most important thing to do is? There's not a runway underneath you. Yeah, keep it in the air. Exactly. Aviate. Second is navigate. It's not staying up there forever. So you got to find somewhere to land it and then communicate. Make sure that you. So I think that's really important. So in both Think One Team and Toolkit for Turbulence, we use the same thing with leaders. We talk about align, collaborate, learn. So what are your elements? So if I'm working with a team, I'm then going, are we aligned? Big picture, etc. Equally, today, are we aligned around expectations? Collaborate. What does that mean? Are we working together closely or are we separating? Learn. How do we close that loop? Because we're dealing with adaptive challenges. So we need to loop, loop, loop. So the metaphor I often use is as a leadership team, it used to be like being in a train and the CEO was in the front carriage and then followed by the CFO, followed by whatever the particular pecking order was. Now you're a fleet of yachts. And the yachts have a destination to go to. But how you communicate, how you make decisions, how you interact with each other is quite different to that. So what's your mental model for that? So I'm not going to use two because I won't go through another big story, but I just think Kevin's experience is such a powerful one for leaders and I think young leaders as well to be thinking, okay, so what mental models do I bring to that sort of complex situation? Because that's what you need in those environments. That's what, if I go to my Olympic work, that's you're developing simple mental models that are going to work under pressure that have been ritualized. Kevin knew how to land a plane on an aircraft carrier. He has a confidence that he can problem solve. He'll compartmentalize. He's got to deal with a whole bunch of other issues later, which is another story. But anyway, I've covered it probably a little too much there, but hopefully that's a graphic story that people will remember. And I encourage them to read Kevin's book, No Man's Land. It is amazingly compelling. And I don't think it'll scare you off planes because I think you'll have faith in the quality of pilots rather than the technicalities of it.
I love that example. I loved your metaphors too. That was a brilliant way of describing it. And we'll also put Kevin's book in the list of resources with the podcast because I haven't read it and I'm definitely going to go and order it straight after this.
Oh yeah, have a look at the newsreel as well. Just Google it. Channel 7 did a kind of spotlight on one of those. Yeah, I mean, if I'm blunt, Qantas don't have a great deal of credit for the way they dealt with it. But I think we've seen the values that Qantas are now trying to sort of rework in their organization. So Kevin is very much a people first, task close behind. I think they were running it as task first, people behind. And that has its costs. And you and I would both well appreciate that.
Totally. First always.
Yeah.
So my next question is there anything else you'd like to share, including any helpful resources that our listeners and viewers might want to access to help them around collaboration and also problem solving?
I mean, obviously I've written a few books on the subject, probably, I don't know, about 8 or 9 now, 10, something like that. Look, I think the best place to go if they want a quick free look is to go to toolkitforturbulence.com. We've put some of the simple tools in there. So the 5 shares, which I talked about earlier. So that's a really simple tool to sit down with your team and say, okay, between share the big picture and pursuing our own agendas, etc., where do we sit? And we've got a number of sort of examples of behavior. So teams can very quickly, and we use that a lot with some of our defense clients, for example, use it right across, like defense science technology, use that across all their areas. A number of the big unis, Melbourne, Monash, ANU, they use those sorts of tools. Second one I use a lot, which I can explain really quickly here, is Probed. Sounds horrible, but if I gave you a problem, Daniel, if I give you a problem and I walk you through it, you will naturally, I'll bet, ask yourself and answer 6 questions. First question will be, well, what's the problem that I'm actually trying to solve here? Just broadly, what is the problem? The second is, so what are the realities of that problem? What are the sort of causes? What are the effects of that problem? And if we can answer those first 2 questions, that's the first 2 letters of Probed. Because what's the purpose? What are the realities? And once you start to do that, you can start to break that up into simple, well, it seems to be the cause of this problem. So if it's, like I'll often hear teams saying, we're not very good at capturing our learning. Okay, so what's some of the realities? Well, we don't have a consistent process. We don't record them. We don't turn our actions into, who's going to do what by when, by etc. Okay, so now if we know that that's that, let's go back to our problem and let's rewrite it as a goal. What do you want to do? Let's say, And the next 90 days, let's do 2 or 3 specific examples of learnings that we can capture from our projects. All right. Now we'll go to our options. What are our options? How would we do that? But apply those options to the things that are about your realities. What are our options for a standard process? What's going to work in our environment? What tools might we need? What cadence might we use? That align, collaborate, learn. What's the cadence for the learn? And then what are our best options? Because what's easy to implement? What fits into our budget? So you've got the P, the R, now the O and the B. So that's almost like our what's the problem or what are your options? And then the next 2 parts, well, what are you going to do about it? So that's the E and the D, execute. What are you going to do? And I always use the 3 Ws. I learned this one from Newmont Mining, and anyone that's worked with Newmont, I'm sure, has been to any one of their meetings. Well, no, you don't walk out of one of those meetings without 3 Ws. And it's what are we going to do? Who, by whom, so who's accountable, and by when. And when you turn up at the next meeting, there it is. And it's so simple. It stops all of this rubbishy meeting minutes. We just clear at the end, and then we start our next meeting with that. And then why do we have a D on the end? When I was at PwC years ago, there was a book called 5 Frogs on a Log. And the question was, there are 5 frogs on a log, 4 of them decide to jump. How many frogs are still on the log? Those of us who can pause for a moment and think clearly, which I don't think was me, realize there's still 5 because they only decided to jump, they didn't jump. So the D is do next. So yes, it's the execution, but what are you going to do next? Like what's your action in the next 24, 48 hours? So that's PROBE, problem, reality, option, best option, execute, do next. Simple tool. You can use it then to present to people. This is the problem we looked at. These are the realities. These are our options. This is our best option based on budget, whatever. This is what we want to execute. For leaders, it's nirvana if somebody walks into their office and says, here's a probe framework. You can coach somebody through it, grab a whiteboard. So I love that as a tool. But once again, just being mindful, if it's an adaptive problem, you might need to loop through it a bit. So there are a few resources, and people will find those in Toolkit for Turbulence and at the website. And there's a few on the Think One team, but not so much.
Love those answers. And again, we'll share those resources with the the commentary we put around the podcast. So we'll make sure that we'll share.
Fantastic.
So we're just about at the end, Graham. Is there anything else you'd like to share around problem solving and collaboration that you think might be helpful for our viewers and our listeners?
I just listened to a Greg McEwen podcast the other day. Greg wrote Essentialism, and probably the book I've recommended more to leadership clients than any other. I think it's a really good book. And it was on problem finding and problem solving. And I think that when we're under pressure, the danger is that we go to solution really quickly. So I think the first thing I'd say is, in cricket terms, when I do sort of work with cricket teams, for example, and put the sports psychology hat on, the concepts hold the tension. So don't try and, unless you're playing 2020, don't try and brain the ball over the boundary. Just stick around. This game's going to last for 3 or 4 days. You can afford to stay there. So hold the tension. So I think it's the ability of in teams to be able to take the time to find the problem that you're actually trying to deal with, rather than implement the solution and get frustrated that your solution's not working. So I think that one. And I think to do that, the other piece of work, if I get references, I love Judith Glaser's work on conversational intelligence. She sadly passed away a few years ago, but she left, I think, a lovely legacy in a very simple 3-level model of conversational intelligence, which if I oversimplify it, but it's sit in a meeting, watch the conversations, you'll see 3 levels. You'll see things that are just about information exchange, which are transactional. You'll see positional conversations where people sort of advocating, pushing their points of view. And then you'll see what she called transformational, where people are asking questions that don't have answers. It's, I wonder why that's the case. Tell me a little bit more about why that. It feels a little uncomfortable for me, but I'd love to understand why. That's the secret to dealing with adaptive challenges, level 3 conversations. So a couple of things, hopefully, that are helpful for people.
They're super helpful. And I need to get a copy of Judith's book. So I'm going to order that straight after as well.
Yeah,
I think I have it, but I'm not sure. But I definitely haven't read it for a while. So.
Yeah, it's probably, I think 2014, if my memory serves me. I just popped a quote into something for a client yesterday, and I mean, I just love her. But there's a quote in one of her books where she said, "The quality of our conversations defines the quality of our relationships, which defines the quality of our culture." And of course, it's the collaborative conversations and the problem-solving conversations that set the tone. So I put a lot of emphasis with the clients I'm working with on, yeah, it's just as in sport, it's the passing of the ball in a field sport. In business, it's your conversations. It's how you set the tone for those. It's how you invite the participation of people. It's how you then facilitate constructively to an outcome or to progress. That's how you create the environment where you can deal with adaptive challenges.
Love that quote and love that answer. Oh, Graham, well, thank you so much for joining us on the
It's been a
Adapt with
pleasure.
Danette FM podcast. Super appreciate you being here, and great podcast.
All right, everybody. Well, thank you for listening to that. That was a great convo, and I think you and Graham had a great chat. Like, just it felt like the ideas were just rolling and flowing very easily. So, Danette, did you have any key insights from the conversation?
I love the idea, and I'd not seen this before, but Judith Glass's 3 levels of conversational intelligence, that really sparked some great ideas in my head. And I really liked his comment, and I'm going to read this so I get it right. The quality of our conversations defines the quality of our relationships, which defines the quality of our culture. So when we're thinking about collaboration and problem solving, going into those deep, rich conversations actually makes it really good. And going back to Kevin Sullivan's example, I really like how he brought in the concept of obviously centering yourself, so breathing to make sure that we're nice and calm in really, what was a very high pressure situation. And I also like the fact that when we're under pressure, having simple mental models actually helps us not have to waste energy and thoughts trying to solve lots and lots of things when we need to focus. They were 2 great takeaways I took from that particular conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there were so many things to sort of jot down notes about. But for me, with that example, he talked about the factory that they built this whole factory to build one product, and they ended up selling less than 1% of their investment. It sort of shows, I think this, a couple of episodes ago, we were talking to Winitha, and I think that to me, when I see that kind of thing where you end up selling less than 1%, there's a lot of blind spots is what that meant.
Yes.
And that to me is probably some element of diversity, and at least a diversity of thoughts and, opinions and stuff, because at the very least you did not account for most people in that circumstance. So there was definitely not enough eyes from different backgrounds on that one. The other thing that I wanted to talk about, which I thought was a really good point that he was making, was how, to him, effective team building is actually building a team of learners, which I think kind of comes back to our collaboration idea, but just the sort of strength of how learning can be important as a sort of a foundation for a good team as well, where you all are sort of interested and you all want to learn together and build together. So that was definitely some great ones for me.
Nice, yeah, totally agree. Such a great conversation.
Well, let's jump into our listener question. And again, if you want to submit a listener question, we're going to do these every week. Again, we're talking about problem solving and collaboration, so that's going to be the key topics. But if you want to submit those, you can do those on Spotify. There's a comment section and a little question area, so feel free to pop it in either of those. And if you go to YouTube, you can pop it in the comments. We'll hopefully tackle it in a future episode. And this week, we've got one from Naresh. Naresh has said, "Hey, Danette, I want to hear your thoughts on being adaptable in my career. I know people can swap industries, but I don't know if I'll be able to find work or will be ready for the different type of work. I'm currently in the mental health field and have been trying to change to something else, but it's a challenge to say the least. Any ideas would be great. Cheers, Naresh."
Well, I reckon, Naresh, you're in a great industry which has lots of skills which are transferable to other industries. I often have conversations with people when I'm in a cab or in an Uber, and a lot of people go, "Oh, I'm just an Uber driver or a cab driver," and I'm like, you have so many skills that can translate to other industries like conversations, customer service, etc. And, if we look at most industries at the moment, mental health, burnout, etc. are challenges. So, Naresh, with your background, you bring skills where you've probably got deep knowledge that because it's deep, you probably don't value it as much as other people will. And I know that when we are really good at stuff, we often discount those skills. So I'd actually pay attention to what people say to you. You know, Naresh, you're really good at that, because that's something I would note for what can I bring to other industries. I'd also, I love the idea of the 1% wins or 1% growth, where each day learns something new. Because while it doesn't look like much in a week or a month, in 12 months' time, you'll be nearly 37 times different to how you are today. So no matter what skills you need, you can actually learn them by just investing consistent time. Doesn't have to be a lot of time, but consistent time daily to continue to grow your skills. The other thing is I'd take the time to actually identify what your current strengths are. And again, look at how they would translate to other industries that you might be interested in. I think also having conversations with people that are in the industries that you want to work in. And, given we're talking about collaboration and problem solving, one of the things to be aware of is when we come from a different industry, we have different insights to other people who are in the industry. So I think that's something to also consider, that you might bring some really brand new perspectives that help your organisation, the new organisation, to be able to innovate and work better on different problems. So there's some suggestions. Jez, did you have any ideas as well?
Well, I mean, I think it's very fascinating because my career has been a bit more like, I do a bit more freelance type stuff. So it is sort of, you're interacting with a lot of different industries all the time, I think. And I think that it's been fascinating, some of the different jobs that I've tried, for example, as doing writing for TV. I've done some comedy TV writing stuff. And what's always fascinating is with that job, there's no wrong experience, because every perspective is valuable in comedy, because if there's one problem, say for example you're looking at a news story, Cadbury's released a new chocolate, everyone's perspective on that is going to be different and interesting. Whether you think maybe you start with Cadbury's your favorite type of chocolate and so this is exciting, or whether it's someone who prefers Lindt or more fancy chocolates and goes, oh, this is who cares. Both of those can act as important insights. You don't know from those two perspectives which one is going to be the best joke, in that context. And so I think you're right, with any career, you being the outsider provides an additional perspective that, maybe people who have spent their entire, like say you're going into a financial business, people who have only worked in finance, you bring in this mental health perspective, it's going to potentially open up a lot of things for them. Maybe you'll be able to help the mental health of all the people at this business. And then that is already a massive win for that company. Yeah. So I think you're in a great position. It's just, obviously it is going to be tricky because the references are going to be from a different industry. But I think if you can get your foot in the door, I think you'll have a great time.
Totally agree. What a great question. Thank you, Naresh.
Yes, thank you, Naresh. We really appreciate that. Now, Danette, did you have any final thoughts on today's conversation with Graham, adaptive solutions to adaptive problems, or just anything else that we've talked about?
Well, actually, Jez, your last comment reminded me, and I think it's an improv thing, that one of the ways that we get to collaborate and problem solve better is, instead of saying no but, we say yes and we open up the conversation. So it reminded me of that. And, the conversation with Graham was fabulous, learned a heap of things and a heap of resources that I've since gone and looked at. So, yeah, I hope our listeners and viewers enjoy the conversation as much as we did.
Well, I mean, Danette, we're basically wrapping up our recording session now, but I wanted to suggest this idea. What do you think about us just doing a quick yes and exercise for people so they can understand what that actually looks like?
Why not?
So for people that don't know, you just kind of build off the idea. So I'll start us off and then we'll just keep building and we'll find some natural end, I'm sure. So I'll kick us off. Wow, Danette, that's a great book you're reading.
Yes, and it's about learning and growing, and the book is by Robin Sharma. It's The 8 Forms of Wealth, and it doesn't just include money.
Well, yes, and that's very exciting because I am interested in not only money but also other things. So did you... I don't know, I'm a little confused now. Maybe we'll scrap this bit.
Sorry, Jez, I didn't know whether you wanted me to talk about my book or another book.
No, I was just doing a little improv thing, but I think it's all good. Look, it was worth trying. We got to try these things on this podcast.
and I reckon we should keep it in, because then people can see that sometimes things don't work, and that's okay. We'll get better next time, hey, Jez?
That's it. Don't come to us for your latest improv show. We'll work on that for another episode. Well, Danette, this has been a really fun episode. So I think thank you to everybody that's been listening and sharing. Did you have any final things to say?
Stay adaptable.